This is the Business Storytelling Show, a top global marketing podcast listened to in more than 100 countries, live streamed on social media, and broadcast on DBTV. Christoph Trappe chats with industry leaders to help your company tell better business stories. Here's today's episode.
Episode 665, my friends. Thanks for joining me. Today we're going to be talking about how do we create better content? How do we do better copywriting, if there's even a difference, content, copywriting? I guess everything is content, right? This is content, so to speak. But how do we do that with better strategic planning, really? And we're going to talk about doing a copywriting brief. Early in my career, you know what I would do? I would just go and someone would say, hey, write this, do that. And you know what would happen? When you write something, but you don't actually understand what they're trying to accomplish, what they're trying to do, you don't understand what the goal is, your content is going to suck. I hope that didn't make the show explicit just now. So I invited Vicki Ross on the show. She's a chief copywriting expert. You can hire her, check her out on LinkedIn. And to find out, how do we do better briefs? How do we know what are we trying to go after? And how do we, don't waste so much time creating stuff that nobody wants? Vicki, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Nice to see you. Really excited to have you on. I always try to find that balance between planning, doing, and then also measuring, right? And looking at what's working and what's not. And when we talk about creating a copywriting brief, certainly that feels very much like we're planning. But kind of talk about what should one of these look like? What should they include? And we'll start there.
Well, I'm going to take you back a bit. I'm hijacking the flow. I'm going to pull you up on content. That is not going to help you write a clear brief and have a clear audience in mind, because content, in my mind, just is another word for stuff. We're on a video chat or a live broadcast. I prefer things to be much more specific. When we sit in meetings and briefings and we say we're going to create content, what does that actually mean? Does it mean an email to a customer or an advert or a social media post? So I hate the word content. That's my starting point.
And that's okay. Thanks for calling that out. And that was kind of a softball, quite frankly. It is, everything is content, right? This is content. Hey, could you write an email? That's content. Could you do this? Could you do a banner, print it out? That's content. A direct mail campaign, that's content. No, absolutely not. I don't want to send anything to anybody in the mail, usually. But why do people, are people just using content as the overarching word for everything because it's easier, or you don't back yourself into a corner of what you actually want? Maybe that's the reason for some people.
I think it's a bit of both. And I think my issue with it started with the entertainment brands that I work with. We would always be in a meeting talking about the content that the entertainment company was creating for the audience. And the audience is never going to say, I'm going to sit down and watch some content on my TV tonight. They're going to watch a TV show, they're going to watch a movie, they're going to watch football or soccer. It's not that no one's saying content. Also, the same goes for any channel, any medium. No one's listening to content on Spotify, they're listening to a podcast. So I think it's really important to be specific. And that comes from a desire to always be respectful to the audience. Because my concern is often that when we use marketing jargon internally, there can be a time where what we say internally gets out externally and doesn't always make sense to the people we're talking to. That's not to say the people we're talking to are stupid. It's just not the language that they're talking in.
Yeah, but it's hard for people to kind of make that twist from what they say all day and their corporate job versus how actual consumers and people talk. Certainly, I agree. I don't listen to content on Spotify. I listen to music or a podcast or maybe an audiobook. By the way, if you do have Spotify Premium, you get 15 hours. They're not even sponsoring this, but I thought that's a very nice new feature. So, so let's maybe dive into a little bit this here on copywriting. Like, what is copywriting specifically? Give me your definition.
Sure. Copywriting is a conversation between a brand and its audience. It's the words on a screen, in print, on products, on social, in audio. And if a brand truly values how it talks to its audience, those conversations are happening everywhere that the brand shows up. And the tone, the theme, the topic is consistent everywhere.
It sounds simple enough, right? The tone and everything is consistent. But how do you actually come up with the right tone for the brand? And what's interesting to me is sometimes I think especially when you first start out, some brands don't have a tone. Some people, thought leaders, don't have a tone. And everybody says, well, that actually has happened to me. Oh, this content isn't my tone. This isn't my voice. And then I'm like, but what is your voice? Like, can you actually define it? Can you actually give me an overview or give me an example of what your voice is? So how do you determine that? Because sometimes people will give you examples and like there are somebody's voice, the example, but there might not necessarily be that brand's, right? It's like somebody else. So how do you figure out what somebody's tone voice should be?
Well, there are a number of ways, but firstly, the most important thing is a brand's tone is not the copywriter's tone. I don't want to hear the copywriter in anything that the brand is saying. That has to be the brand's voice. So, how do you define a brand's voice? That could come from the founder. So, for example, Richard Branson hugely influences the personality and voice of all the Virgin brands. It could come from some people like to create characters or mascots for a brand. So you would define who that person is and what they like to do and the sorts of things that they say. Or you could look to a character that's well known. So, for example, one TV channel I worked with is Sky Atlantic, who brought all the HBO shows from the US over to the UK. And one of the TV series that launched on the channel when the channel launched was Mad Men. And we found through loads of brainstorming that the tone of voice for the channel would be Don Draper. And when you have a character to refer to, it helps people, especially non-copywriters. They know how to write in a tone of voice. It's usually the non-copywriters that find it harder to get into the mood of that voice or to review or sign off copy in that tone. So you're able to go, what would Don Draper say? How would Don Draper say it? Would Don Draper get involved in those conversations on social? And that really is a quick shortcut to producing copy for the brand, if you know the character.
What's interesting to me too is when you have like the brand tone, but then especially what I do, there's a lot of thought leadership content, right? So there's actually a person attached to it, whether it's the CEO or whether it's whoever, a product owner or somebody internal who is the subject matter expert on the topic. So how do those have to align in your opinion, and how much do they have to? Because if let's say the brand is really, really formal, I'm not formal at all, right? Like, in fact, even my writing, even when I write for other people, like, my first drafts are usually not formal enough if they want it to be really formal. So how do you ensure they're aligned, but you're also authentic for the person?
So I think as a person, even if you are representing a brand, you are still a person first, and you shouldn't be expected to speak in the brand's voice. People want to hear your voice. That's your unique perception and character that you bring to the brand that helps make the brand what it is. What else did you say I was going to answer to? Also, I think it's probably quite refreshing if a brand is formal, but the people behind the brand aren't. It makes people less robotic, more human, more approachable, more appealing. I think it's important for a brand to take itself seriously, but for the people behind it to not take themselves too seriously. The people within the brand are the people that build it.
Yeah, I think the whole thing of not taking yourself too serious is kind of interesting, anyways, because I mean, it depends on the brand, right? But a lot of brands, they sell things that you can certainly have a little bit of fun, but you can also go too far and be too silly, or it doesn't make sense. But let's talk about how do we, when we start with a brief, what, and you know what? I actually don't like the term brief for anything. And the reason is because, I'm old enough now that I remember when people did briefs, they're just very formal, very stuffy, just like, it sounds like paperwork. So I still do briefs today, but I use a template kind of, but they're not like, it's not super stuffy. It's not, it's like, this is what I got to think about. This is what I got to do. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. Here's the story, blah, blah, blah. Even though I wouldn't think of myself as a copywriter, to be honest. But from your perspective, what needs to be included in that planning phase as you're moving forward, whether it's a formal brief or whether it's just a rough outline people follow?
I can't stop myself making the joke that everybody makes, first of all, which is a brief is never brief, it's too long. So you sound like a great client if you know that a brief should be brief. So that's the first thing. I think obviously it's important to have a lot of the information that goes into a brief, which is usually loads of background, insight, data, research. But if you're creating quickly as a creative, whilst it's important to know all of the background, it's also important to get straight to the work at hand. And I guess if you know the brand already, you know where it's going to come from. So you just want to know where it's going. So in my opinion, a brief should have what it would be nice if a brief was one page and no longer. I mean, if you could get it down to a sentence, that would be even better. But a brief should have one clear objective, one clear desired outcome, and one clear message to communicate. So an objective might be to raise awareness of something, and an outcome might be a change in behavior because of that awareness that was raised. And then the USP might be the one key thing that the brand wants to communicate. And so often on a brief, I see, they usually have the same format and they will say the same thing. So it will say on the brief, what's the one USP that you want to communicate in this communication? And the client will have listed 6 to 10 things. And then you ask them, well, okay, I see the list, but what's the most important thing? And often they can't decide because they want to do too much at once. And I get, putting stuff out there costs money. We don't always have the time that we want, but an audience isn't going to respond to a list of detailed information. We should be, and this isn't to disrespect our audience's intelligence, but we should try and make things as quick and clear as possible for them so they don't have to do much work when they're with us. Again, it depends on the brand. I'm working with a brand at the moment, and one of their personality traits is intriguing and thought-provoking. So that's an occasion where we don't want to feed everything to the audience. We want them to fill in the gaps and use their imagination. But generally, if it's just, you're writing on behalf of a supermarket and lettuce is discounted this week, then just tell people that. And then, they're more likely to take action. And that's a really important point, by the way. Copywriting should always lead to an action. We're not writing fiction. We're not leaving people with something to think about. We're steering them to do something.
But of course, the action is debatable. What it could be, right? I mean, it could be sign up for a newsletter. It could be whatever, right? But if if the lettuce is cheaper for the weekend, or I'm earning more points. I mean, I'm a big fan of Hy-Vee in Iowa here, and I get cheaper gas, right, based on when I buy, because they have these fuel savers. So I literally filled up yesterday for $8 for the entire tank. So my point is, I don't need them when there's a deal, when you get extra fuel saver rewards. I don't need them to write me a novel, right? I just need them to say, this is when this deal is valid, and then they have to get the deal in front of me. So when you were talking about how people just add stuff, I mean, the first thing that came to my mind, of course, I work at growgetter.io. If you want to check that out, in my day job, we do growth marketing in the market research field. And what happens is, companies, they do a study or, a research project, and they just one more question. Let's add one more question, because internally, right, they want to like get one more thing in there. But externally, it's not going to work. And then we wonder why people don't want to take surveys, right? Because they get longer and longer and longer. How do you get those things reined in and get people internally thinking about the audience when they're currently just thinking about themselves?
They so are thinking about themselves, and they're nervous. And I get the nerves. Especially now, times are crazy, budgets are really tight. We're trying to earn people's attention when there are so many other things attracting their attention. So some of it is just a lack of confidence in the product you're selling, or the story you're telling, or whatever it is that you're sharing with your audience. So I I do two things. So one is I'm really lucky to work with major global brands who are category leaders. They don't always remember that they're category leaders, so I'm really keen to remind them. I don't want a brief that says, we looked at our next competitor across from us or down from us, and we want to do what they're doing. Like, they should not. You should be aware of what your competitors are doing, but not for them to inspire what you do next. You should be, charging straight ahead and leaving them in the dust. So that's the first thing I do: remind a brand of who they are and what they're capable of. And if there are any previous success stories, I'll remind them of that. It's amazing how a client, when they're caught up in the moment, don't remember the bigger picture around them and what got them to where they are. And then similarly, my second thing would be, I present information on a page. Again, it's amazing how often people don't take the time to do this, but look at what your competitors are saying in the same category and put the same messages next to each other on a page. It sounds so simple. It is simple. So that you can see in black and white in an instant how and where you can and should stand out. That for me is like, you're never going to win an argument with anybody if you haven't thought through the case. So I always get a little bit dramatic and say, imagine you're a lawyer in a court of law. You couldn't just say, this is the reason we're doing this, without providing evidence. So think of everything that you pull together as evidence that you want to present to your clients, so that they cannot argue in the other way, in the opposite.
Yeah, it's just, I think part of the problem is, right, we're in meetings and meetings and meetings all day, and people influence us and all these different things. I mean, I still remember, and this is a long time ago now, but there was a CEO of a healthcare institution, and they were like, oh, we need to do more billboards. I see billboards all the time, like on the way home, right? But like, who looks at billboards? I mean, people do, right? But is that really the best use of, the budget? That's debatable. But the only reason that person even was pushing for billboards is because they saw them. But whether or not, and maybe healthcare is a different example, because probably everybody on that highway is actually a potential patient at that healthcare organization, institution. But at the end of the day, we don't even know, do we align with our clients, our customers? Am I my if I personally, am I my own personal, I mean, my ideal customer, you know what I mean? If that made sense. Do we know? Like, we have to ask those questions. We have to make sure we know who we're actually trying to reach.
Yeah,
So
and
then,
you know what? The answer is really easy to get to, or one answer is really easy to get to, because a lot of our audience is on social media all day, every day. We, often say, oh, no one reads anything anymore, or no one wants to know what brands say. But social media is a place where people go and actively look for a brand that they want to follow and pay attention to. Similarly, when people subscribe to a brand's newsletter, they are actively choosing to be marketed to and to read what that company wants to say. Yes, you can measure open rates, but it's quicker, I think, if you just look on social media and see what your followers are responding to, what they're engaging with, are they even replying? And then you can get a bit of an idea of what people are going to respond to outside of that channel.
So always pay attention to what's going on, what people are doing, what people are saying, how they're behaving. Now, sometimes there's people, you could plan as much as you want, and then they'll change their mind, or they'll keep, evolving what they want to do. How do you kind of get that under control? And I'm a big fan of collaboration, but how do you get that under control to an extent? Do you have like a 2-minute answer on that?
I think if a brand is established and confident in who it is and how it shows up and what it talks about, it can talk about anything at any moment in any situation. Like I hate talking about the pandemic. No one, it doesn't make anyone happy. But at the start of the pandemic, so many brands rushed to say something, anything, just to have a voice out there in the middle of the mayhem. And it was the brands that have been established for a long time and stayed true to themselves and consistent in how they communicate that put out the best communication. So Nike said something like, on social media, they said something like, now is your chance to play for the world, which is an ad that could have run at any time. The only difference was at the bottom, they said play inside, play for the world, to keep everyone indoors during the lockdowns. Durex didn't even change their promise, which was protecting people since 1929, but they added to it with now it's your turn, so they were able to sort of take the opportunity to jump in on the conversation where people were being told to wear something to protect themselves in a potentially dangerous situation, which is what they've been trying to do since their existence. So yeah, if a brand knows who it is and stays true to itself, it can say anything to the time that it's in.
Yeah, it's very interesting. How do you make it work, and how do you find the right timing? It's just like during COVID. I know we're all sick and tired of it, but I mean, yes, people just jumped in, they said whatever, and just to have something to say. So don't do that either. Be strategic. But I also don't think that means that we should just not say much. I mean, sometimes you hear people talk about, hey, slow down to speed up, whatever. And I don't believe in that at all. I believe you see this example on this show, right? Somebody says, how do you come up with all these ideas? I said, I don't. My guests do. Vicky is talking about this topic somewhere. I don't remember where. And I was like, hey, Vicky, you want to come on the show? Great topic. You came up with the idea. I just saw you. So that's kind of how that works. You always run out of time when you are having fun. Really appreciate you coming on. Nice to meet you. And if you can kind of tell us who should reach out to you, who are your perfect clients, so to speak?
Oh, I mostly work with entertainment brands, and you can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter, although I'm not sure I'm liking Twitter anymore, but I'll hang in there.
Thanks for tuning in. Please rate and review the Business Storytelling Show on your favorite podcast platform, and subscribe so you don't